right, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started talking about Dr. Oppenlander while we get these last few folks in. Dr. Richard Oppenlander is a sustainability consultant, a researcher, and an author whose award-winning book, Comfortably Unaware, has been endorsed as a must-read by Ellen DeGeneres and Dr. Jane Goodall, among others. His most recent book is called Food Choice and Sustainability. It's won numerous awards, including the 2014 International Book Award, and it's being used by think tanks and strategists. Dr. Oppenlander is a much sought-after international lecturer on the topic of food choice and how it relates to sustainability, and he served as the lead consultant for 2 full-length documentary films. He also serves as an advisor to World Hunger projects in developing countries and with municipalities in the United States. Dr. Oppenlander has spent the past 40 years studying the effects of food choice and their effects on the planet and on us. He started an organic plant-based food production company, which, there it is, and operates an animal rescue sanctuary with his wife Jill, and is the founder and president of the nonprofit organization Inspire Awareness Now. He has been asked to speak at the European Parliament 3 weeks from now, which is kind of neat as well. So, with that, please welcome, this is a fantastic speech. We're so lucky to have with us Dr. Richard Oppenlander.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Benji. Very nice. I really appreciate all that. Well, hello, everyone. Oh, gosh. Come. Now, you can do better than that, eating all that plant-based, starchy, energy food. Let's try that again. Hello, everyone. Hello. Oh, much better. Much more vivacious. What an amazing event this is, isn't it? Yeah. It really is. I mean, thank all of you for taking the time to come and making it so very special. It's certainly an honor for me to be here today. And, of course, we all send our prayers to those affected by the recent events in Paris. Knowing and doing. This is Earth, the planet we live on. Well, most of us live on this planet anyway. It's been here for 4.5 billion years, with life thriving on it for 3 billion years. Hominids, such as Australopithecus, came into the picture about 4 million years ago, and our species, Homo sapiens, separated ourselves out from that group at around 100 to 200,000 years ago. Put into perspective, our planet and life on it's been here for quite some time. 4 billion years before we were. Agriculture and civilization began about 6,000 years ago when we started domesticating animals and plants. And then industrialization took place, with factories popping up everywhere in the mid-1800s and early 1900s. So with this extraordinarily long history of life balancing itself so very well in a natural manner for so very long on our planet, we humans came along and began the path toward creating serious damage to our planet, to ourselves, and to other species in just the last 150 years. A snapshot of our planet today reveals this. We're running out of land and fresh water. Pollution and human-induced greenhouse gas emissions are threatening our atmosphere and waterways and negatively affecting our climate. Our oceans and sea life are being destroyed. We're losing habitat, ecosystems, and biodiversity, with mass extinctions occurring at a rate that we haven't seen since the dinosaurs were lost 65 million years ago. Nearly 900 million people in the world are suffering from hunger. 1/2 of our topsoil has been lost, with areas becoming completely desertified. All this while we witness escalating rates of chronic disease regarding our own human health. There are some scientists who predict that time is running out for us, that we may only have 50 to 75, maybe 100 years remaining. These are researchers. They're not doomsdayers. I call all this global depletion, the loss of our primary resources on Earth, as well as our own health. It's still sustainability. I just think we need to hear it from a different direction, and we need to hear the whole story through an unfiltered lens. We have about 5 or 6 recognized categories of generations of humans living right now. The younger X, Y, and Z generations are over here at the left end. The millennials are in there somewhere. I can't always find the millennials because they're frequently too busy texting on their phones and playing with photos. and then at the other end, we have the greatest generation. But they're in their 80s and 90s and 100s, and they've done so much. But they're also the generation with their parents that unintentionally began the irreversible loss of our environment. So that leaves the 2 generations or 3 in the middle, or a combination of generations in the middle. And we have a daunting task in front of us regarding this environment issue, don't we? To first realize that we're damaging the planet. To what extent? That's the first big step. And then how to somehow fix it. When I step back and look at this, I see a picture of tremendous responsibility, opportunity of profound historical magnitude. My generation and the generation of our 3 adult children, the 2 or 3 generations in the middle here that are in somewhat of a leadership position today, are in a unique situation to save Earth as we know it and save life on it now and allow a livable future for those coming after us. Or we could ignore things, act like nothing's happening, or, hey, when we get around to it, and allow it to continue on its current path to possibly be destroyed. What's at stake? The extinguishing of our own species and thousands of other species. We could make or break humanity. That could be at stake. And if you think that this is a wild overstatement, some gross exaggeration, or that this problem is entirely related to climate change, well, then that doubt, that skepticism and lack of awareness and lack of action all become part of the problem. So certainly something needs to change. What is it that we're doing to our environment? What needs to change? And importantly, how fast does this change need to take place? The answers to those questions, I think, are easy. We need to stop those practices and habits that we administer every single day on a collective basis globally that create an unnecessary and proportionately large resource footprint, beginning with the largest footprint of all, food, what we eat, our agricultural systems. It's a larger resource guzzler than anything else we do. It also happens to be the easiest to change. Well, okay, as compared to mandated global population control, the culling of other humans to get us down to 3 billion mark where we were in 1950. Let's see, yeah, you over here, you need to go. And okay, that whole table, we don't need you anymore. Out you go. Well, that's not going to happen. Or the immediate elimination of all fossil fuel use, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. And you know what? Even if it did, it doesn't really solve all the problems of global depletion anyway. How quickly do we need to change our habits, our footprint? I can tell you this. It's not a time for baby steps. It requires big person steps because it needs to be done right now. It needs to be done today. We're on very real timelines. Now, before you get up and leave, I hope those of you in the back are just stretching. Get back here. Not through yet. Let's see what all this means and take a little closer look at it. Many of the choices you have in life will have a profound impact on something else in the world, especially with things you consume, like food. It's one of the major disconnects we seem to have. What you do here might affect something over there. How to start looking outside of the microcosm or the bubble that each of us tends to live in, and then perhaps how to encourage others to do the same. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I began looking at food choices and agricultural systems quite some time ago, and therefore I stopped eating processed foods and stopped eating animals nearly 40 years ago when I was in graduate school, primarily from a human health and environment standpoint, but also because of the animal research I was involved with at that time, which I still do quite a bit of. But now it's this type of animal research, perhaps in a jungle, a remote area, getting a better grasp on what sustainability really does in fact mean. So that would have to include continuing researching animals like these at the largest and smallest dairy operations in the world. And these, grass-fed or pastured livestock operations here in the US and many countries overseas. This happens to be in the UK, and that guy really likes me. I'm not talking about the human. And I've researched quite a few farms like these. We can't leave fish out of the equation now, can we? Well, we're going to examine the word again very carefully today, the word sustainable because it's typically misused, and we do not want to get it wrong. Recently, it's been morphed into so many different meanings to suit so many different needs, and it's the latest buzz. I mean, you see this word everywhere. For most people, it refers to our energy sector, how many miles per gallon of gas your car can achieve, how many energy-efficient light bulbs you can switch out to save electricity, or to waste, how, what, and when to recycle. Often we think of economic or social sustainability, but rarely, if ever, is food choice connected to sustainability efforts, especially the raising and eating of animals despite its enormous effect. It's simply too challenging for everyone, culturally, socially. Well, as I mentioned, we humans have reached a critical and fragile point in our evolutionary journey as a species. Just in the last 100, 150 years, a blink of an eye, we've reached the Anthropocene era, where we've acquired the power to negatively change our biosphere, the litho, hydro, and atmosphere. We're ruining the very environs that sustain us and sustain all other life on Earth. In fact, 5 out of 9 identified tipping points or planetary boundaries related to our life support systems on Earth, 5 out of 9 have already been passed. How does your breakfast, lunch, or dinner, for instance, what you choose to eat today, have anything to do with this shaman, this medicine man from the Amazon area, or one of the 2 billion people in the world without water? Or the imminent extinction of a number of species on Earth, or the plight of this starving child in Ethiopia, or even the taxes that I have to pay, well, I should pay to our government this year. What possibly could you and the food you choose to eat have anything to do with these things? And then why should you care? The story for me always begins with these 2 numbers. There's 7.4 billion people living on our planet today, with 240,000 added every single day. So control of the growth of our population is an issue, but it's not nearly so much of a problem as the number on the right, what we're doing to the planet. The number on the right represents the fact that there are more than 70 billion animals living on our planet that we raise and eat for food each year, and it repeats itself year after year in growing numbers. In fact, that's the problem. This 70 billion number is quite impossible to pin down, and it's very much on the light side, because on any given day you might find up to 1.7 trillion chickens in the world, or 1 to 2 trillion fish in the world, on their way sooner or later going off to slaughter that year. Well, let's look at a graphic about global depletion. Certainly there are other industries that contribute to this picture, but none have the comprehensive impact. Simply put, we're in overshoot mode, demanding more of our planet's resources than what it can supply. We've been in overshoot mode since 1973. It would take 1.5 to 2 full Earths to sustain what we're currently taking from and doing to our planet. It's serious enough on its own merit, but it's made much more so because of all the layers of various influences that tend to bury the problem and bury its solutions. Now, what's critical for everyone to understand is that this is not just a factory farm issue, not at all. It's a raising animals to eat issue. And we're going to see that as we go along today. Let's refine our thoughts on global warming or climate change. First, we need to remember that global warming is just one component of the much larger, more insidious problem of global depletion, the more total effect we have on our planet, and it's not all caused by the energy sector. Discussions regarding global warming and climate change have now taken front stage nearly everywhere. It must be remembered, though, that climate change will have the effects of exacerbation, taking events and making matters worse. Global warming and climate change, for instance, will not be the initial cause of these categories of global depletion. We cause these things. Climate change will worsen them. This widely cited study was shocking when it first appeared. I mean, how could the meat everyone's eating cause more greenhouse gas emissions than what's caused by powering all the cars, trucks, planes, and trains that we drive and fly every day? It's hardly conceivable. But instead of 18%, as that original 2006 United Nations report stated, or even their most recent figure of 14.5%, a couple of researchers have found that livestock could produce, I mean, it's possible, they could produce as much as 51% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there are a number of reasons for the difference in these two numbers, low to high, but regardless of where the exact number resides, somewhere between 14.5 and 51, it's cause for alarm, and it's cause for immediate action. A perfect example of how this information is suppressed occurs every single year during our climate change conferences, held originally in Kyoto with its 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Soon it'll be in France, and where countries come together and they're trying to solve this global warming problem, but none of this is being addressed. Nothing's really been accomplished at these global climate change conferences, primarily because the 2 largest emitters in the world, China and the US, don't participate actively. And the 200 countries in attendance can't agree on anything. So now the attention is turning to how we can all adapt to climate change, since it appears to be inevitable to them, rather than putting forth the effort to truly mitigate it. This year's conference is being held in just a few weeks, and organizers know that time is running out. So legally binding agreements will be made, although by all estimates, these pledges will not be ambitious enough. That's because many and every aspect of global depletion has a timeline. It's not really a question of if we're going to run out of something, it's when. At the current pace we're at. The most critical timeline of all is that of climate change. We only have a 2-year window of time from now to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or we're going to see irreversible warming of our planet with catastrophic effects. It's already happening. In fact, the International Energy Agency has been quite clear about this window of opportunity for us to limit global warming, and that window closes at the end of year 2017. If you do the math, it's conceivable that we could exceed our budget, what's allowed for atmospheric carbon to be dumped into the atmosphere by the year 2050 without the energy sector or fossil fuels even factored into the equation, simply due to raising livestock. To summarize the connection between food choice and climate change, we have this. Climate change is very real, it's worsening, and the situation's urgent. Greenhouse gas emissions that we produce, anthropogenic, significantly affect climate change. Raising animals for us to eat is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And lastly, any food movement away from factory farms, but including grass-fed or pastured animal systems, will not solve the problem. In fact, it's going to make it worse. More land use changes, more deforestation, more production of methane, 60 to 70% more methane produced per one grass-fed cow as compared to grain-fed. How really important is food choice in climate change? We're currently pumping in 54 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases into our atmosphere each year, 54 gigatons. If we converted all global cropland that's currently growing crops to feed livestock and converted all pasture land with grazing livestock, converted those lands to regenerative plant-based systems producing food for us to eat directly, we'd find ourselves at a net negative greenhouse gas scenario. Complete mitigation, all greenhouse gases currently being emitted by all sources would be sequestered into the soil. That's how important it is. Given the predictions of nearly every climate scientist in the world, business as usual approach, as we're now taking to climate change, isn't working. Therefore, it's time to get outside the box. It's time to take the right action and to do it now. Looking at solutions, prescriptions, this is what we have. The first approach is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel, just like Al Gore and everyone else recommends. But renewable energy infrastructure, such as building solar and wind generators all over the world to reduce climate change, I mean, that's a good idea, but it's projected to take at least $1 trillion per year for the next 34 years to develop. Well, we don't have 34 years. And we really don't have $34 trillion, so another solution to climate change would be we could stop eating animals. It doesn't have to take 34 years. And instead of $34 trillion, it costs you nothing. That's the prescription to mitigate, not adapt to, but to mitigate climate change. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Interspersed throughout our discussions are a few themes. One theme is how information about this particular subject has been suppressed, even mismanaged, so much so that objectives of many important meetings like those climate change conferences and other organizations, well, those objectives aren't being met. And that all begins with the words we use, I think. I mean, how clear are they? Are they conveying reality? These are all food movements that superficially seem to make sense. I mean, they make you feel as if you're going in the right direction, maybe except for paleo. Well, they make you feel as if you're going in the right direction because they're going away from factory farms. They're going away from processed foods. That's got to be a good thing, right? Maybe. Maybe not. Do any of these words mean sustainable or healthy? Many would want you to think so. How about the word humane? Does humane equal sustainable? That's a bit of a stretch. And if it does, which it doesn't, who is it that tries to define humane for all of us? And what does real food mean? I mean, I have issues with its precepts. Real food's a very large movement today, getting larger and larger on college campuses, and it's being defined by being local, fair, sustainable, and humane. All four of those things. Well, that sounds terrific. So I brought two types of food items with me that I usually carry around, well, at least one of them, and I thought I'd show you. One's not real food. It's this Vega bar. Yeah, it's not real food because it's not local. It's made in Vancouver. And worse, it's processed. I mean, it's all put together for you. But it does have sachi-inchi seeds, fair traded. It has 4 different types of organic plant protein. It's really put together quite beautifully well, but remember, it's not real food. It doesn't fit their definition. Whereas this other food item I brought is considered real food. And actually, I can't get myself around to bringing this other food item. I never can. It's this. Over 18,000 chickens are killed every minute. Every 60 seconds in our country, 18,000. I suppose that's pretty real. And if chicken, pork, beef, or any animal product is considered real food, what about these? Real food too? Sure. Why not? They come along with it. Hey, and they're free. So unlike the Vega bar, this poor thing's considered real foods because it's local. And the real food people think it's sustainable, healthy, and humane, but it's not. It's none of those things other than being local. Therefore, the real food movement is seriously flawed because the definitions they're using are flawed, similar to every other food movement on this list. Just because something is local doesn't at all mean that it's healthy, sustainable, or humane. It doesn't even mean that it should be eaten. The only thing that local means is that it's not very far from here. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment. And here's a new agricultural movement called climate smart. Yeah, hey, nice thought. But given the global warming predicament that we're in, shouldn't we be growing and eating only plant-based foods, which would then make this food movement the climate smartest? I mean, we all want to be smart, but who wouldn't want to be the smartest, right? Well, it all begins with the words we use. Are they conveying reality? This represents a food term that's just constantly used improperly. I mean, what is this? It's a protein, perhaps a rudimentary protein. It doesn't have the secondary and tertiary characteristics, but nevertheless, it's a protein. So when you're thinking about eating protein, this is what you should be thinking about, as in, I need to get my protein today. Protein is not the little buddy looking over my shoulder. She's getting pretty tired of being called protein, and that's my research assistant. Seems pretty obvious. And what about this group therapy session? I mean, none of these guys want to be called protein. It's most likely why a couple of them are in group therapy. Protein's also not the guy on the left here, and yet that's what people are calling protein. The guy on the left with the overzealous smooch and the excessive amount of saliva that he always has, he's a cow. He shouldn't be called protein. He shouldn't be called protein any more than the guy on the right, and yet we do. In fact, his name is Plato. One of the most pressing concerns we have today regarding sustaining our life and future life on Earth is our supply of fresh water. From 1941 to 2011, the world's population has tripled, but freshwater consumption quadrupled. There's a growing gap between worldwide demand for water and what's really available. With so much demand, there's expected to be a 40% shortage in water supply in just the next 15 years. Now, what you decide to eat has every single thing to do with this. Scientists are very concerned about water scarcity, but I think it's really more a matter of water management, isn't it? Yeah, instead of focusing on technologies, we should be first looking at choices. Is this a good choice? How about this choice? Are any of these good choices? They're all global averages as compared to, say, these choices. It's quite a difference, wouldn't you say? Although water on Earth remains constant, the consumptive form it happens to be in does not. 4 out of 5 people now live within 30 miles of a water-damaged area, meaning soon to run out or polluted. There are nearly 300 transboundary river and waterways on Earth where multiple countries share vital running water supply. As we see water shortages over the next 15 years, we will surely see droughts, famine, human sickness, and then we're going to see conflicts, social unrest, and even wars. Indeed, those living downstream will be fiercely battling those living upstream for their water rights. Climate change will make these matters worse, but not cause them. Food choice and virtual water trading through food, especially with animal products, will play a much larger role than energy or fossil fuel use. In many areas of the world, freshwater scarcity coexists with hunger and poverty. Afghanistan, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia are raising livestock and crops to feed them while running their water supplies dry. 60% of Ethiopia's population suffers from hunger and thirst, and yet their dehydrated land is being used to support a growing herd of over 50 million cattle, the largest in Africa. Syria is in need of a number of things, but they're also desperately in need of freshwater supplies for the thirsty 18 million humans, but at the same time, they're attempting to provide water for 47 million cattle, sheep, and goats. And so it is with Pakistan, Mongolia, Russia, India, China, nearly every country in the world struggling with an increasing human population, dwindling natural resources, and being strangled by their meat and dairy culture. So this has to include the country of California, right? And most of the southwest United States. Regarding freshwater, and despite the recent effects of El Nino, things aren't going so well in California, but have they given thought to where most of their water supply is going? It's not to golf courses, and it's certainly not to lawn care. Between 60 and 70% of the total consumptive water usage in California goes to livestock and crops to feed them. California uses, as an example, 900,000 acres of land just to produce alfalfa. Anyone here from California? Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Because each one of those 900,000 acres, each one of them, requires 1 to 2 million gallons of water per year to irrigate. And they all get irrigated, every single one of them. And guess where all that alfalfa goes? It goes to livestock. 5% to horses, the rest to livestock. You know, being concerned and showing graphs of precipitation levels won't solve California's problem. The government mandate of a 25% cut in water use won't solve much either, because they haven't factored in the water footprint of what they're eating. Using less water to brush our teeth, flush toilets, and do laundry, or less time in the shower will save 2 to 3 gallons of water per day for each act. That's important. However, eliminating meat and dairy from one's diet will save on average over 1,000 gallons of water per person every day. If California stopped growing alfalfa for livestock just for 1 year, the amount of water saved that year would be enough water to provide drinking water to the entire human population of the city of San Francisco, not for 1 year, but for 66 years. The average household in our country uses 50,000 gallons of water in 1 year, according to the EPA. Indoor use, about the same outdoors. It's quite a bit of water, and it's what we're focused on in times of drought, how to reduce this. The average person in our country, though, consumes about 200 pounds of meat in 1 year, divided between 46 pounds of pig, 58 pounds of cow, 102 pounds of chicken and turkey, in addition to the 248 eggs and 616 pounds of dairy products, which equates to 405,000 gallons of water per person per year just to support that animal product diet. So now, a more accurate view is that every household of 3 people in the US, well, they use over 1 million gallons of water each year. Not 50,000, 1.2 million gallons, and 96% of that outrageous water use is from their choice to eat animals. So whenever there's a drought or water shortage anywhere in our country, does our government ever step up and declare a state of rationing meat or dairy, or eliminating meat or dairy? Well, why not? Why shouldn't they? So then, these are the timelines that we're confronted with for fresh water, and it's not anything we can feel comfortable with. And what about this phrase? 15 million people heard Ted Danson proclaim his love of fish on Earth Day last year, and every other day since 1987, and yet he eats them. For all those years. Now, no offense to Mr. Danson, please, and maybe things have changed recently for him, but for him and 98% of all other individuals in the world, this phrase, I love fish, actually means this. I love to eat fish, doesn't it? Yeah, that's what he really means, because if you love fish, as in loving your cat or your dog, you certainly wouldn't kill and eat them, would you? No, I don't think so. Again, it's how we use our words, isn't it? There are 3 principal ways our oceans are being destroyed, and all 3 are caused or at least heavily affected by our food choice. Raising and eating animals on land causes warming and acidification of our oceans. Surface runoff from livestock operations on land has caused more than 500 nitrogen-flooded dead zones around the world, comprising 95,000 square miles of areas completely devoid of oxygen or life. So any meaningful discussion of the state of our oceans has to first begin with frank discussions about land-based animal agriculture, but it is fishing that has the largest impact of all. Incredibly large amounts of sea life are taken from our oceans in 3 ways. First, they're taken as target fish. You know, that's the one you want to eat. Fish are also taken out of our oceans to feed other fish, grown on factory fish farms, part of the aquaculture movement. And lastly, fish are also taken as bykill due to the first two types of fishing. Oh my goodness, that really doesn't leave too much in our oceans now, does it? In fact, our oceans are being ravaged, and yet everyone we know still eats fish. Fragile, interdependent, and poorly understood ecosystems have been devastated. Over 90 million tons of fish were caught just last year, with quite a few more hundreds of millions of tons of bykill, which are all those other innocent sea life caught and killed and discarded in the process of trying to catch that targeted fish everyone's asking for. Bykill includes juvenile fish that will never make their way to maturity, all 7 of the endangered sea turtles, sea lions, birds, dolphins, even whales are bykill. Of the 17 major fishing stock areas in the world, all of them are either overexploited or on the verge of collapse. 87% of all the world's fish species are affected, considered heavily depleted from overfishing practices. Well, that's quite a bit of damage. But along comes this word sustainable to justify continued harvesting. We can just stamp this word on anything and then continue in the take mode, and we can feel good about it. Why? Well, because it's sustainable. That's why. I mean, how is that word even used in the fishing industry? Who defines it? Who monitors it? And with less than 1% of all of our oceans being regulated, then who decides on enforcement? If you look at this carefully, the real answer is no one, and I say real answer because now there's sea life caught and labeled sustainable when in fact it's not. But it's still labeled as such by a number of highly respected organizations, such as the Marine Stewardship Council. And there are many, many examples of this: tuna, cod, pollock, haddock, salmon, krill. I mean, there's so many. The Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, highly respected organization, still has lobster from the Gulf of Maine, both US and Canada waters, listed as a good alternative. They've had it listed as a good alternative for years, but it's not. It never has been. Never has been because of a few reasons: rapidly declining number of lobster, inefficient trapping mechanisms, and most importantly, I think, is the sad effect lobster trapping has on the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. There are only 400 of these truly magnificent creatures left that we haven't killed. And nearly all of them, 80% of them, are getting entangled, injured, and killed in those trap lines. We owe these whales and lobsters much more than this. Elsewhere in the world, there have been an estimated 500 miles of non-biodegradable fishing nets cut loose from fishing vessels each year. 500 miles of fishing nets cut loose each year for the past 25 years, catching countless numbers of unsuspecting sea life. You know, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch is aptly named because that's exactly what they're doing. They watch all this happen while promoting it to be continued. Each year, more than 300,000 whales, dolphins, and porpoises are killed in fishing gear. And so it is with fishing under the sustainable label. Target fish are becoming extinct. We move on to the next fish in line, creating serial depletion, and then other sea life up and down the food web are becoming extinct, a cascading effect, all part of the collateral damage that begins with us. Coral reef systems around the world are in serious trouble. The Great Barrier Reef has lost more than half of its coral cover since 1985. Most would think it's due to pollution and climate change. But the primary cause of coral reef death throughout the entire Caribbean region anyway, and most of the rest of the world, is not pollution. It's not from climate change. It's from overfishing. An example in the other direction can be found in the Queens Islands off the southern coast of Cuba, where they haven't allowed commercial fishing. Their coral reef ecosystems today look the same as they have for the past thousands of years. One of the most important factors in balancing coral reef systems are predatory fish, like sharks, but we're killing them too, quite a few of them. 1/3 of all shark species are nearing extinction. We're killing nearly 100 million sharks per year. Why? Well, 40 million sharks have their fins cut off like this, and then they're thrown overboard to die, so we can eat shark fin soup. It's terrible to see this, but I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourselves, I don't eat shark fin soup. No, not me. And furthermore, it's banned in 8 states in our country. Well, isn't that great? But again, over 98% of us do eat fish. And by eating fish, any type of fish, we're doing this to 60 million sharks that are caught each year and killed in fishing nets and fishing lines as bykill. So go ahead and ban shark fin soup all you want, but why would you stop there? If you're truly concerned about sharks and the state of our oceans, you should ban fishing. Killing krill now has become a very large business, but you don't need to eat krill or any other sea life to get your omega-3s, unless of course, you listen to Dr. Oz. However, krill is fundamental to the survival of almost every animal species in and around the Antarctic, and krill numbers have dropped by 78% since 1980. Here's the point regarding our oceans. It's no longer a problem of overfishing. That was a term that could be used in the mid-1800s. Today, it's about fishing. Not to worry, because now we have fish farms. 49% of all fish consumed worldwide are produced from aquaculture, which is growing faster than any other food sector. One reason for this tremendous growth is the very false illusion of environmentalism. Here we have another interesting idea where fish are caught in our already ravaged oceans to feed other fish produced on factory fish farms, sometimes at a ratio of 20 to 1, in the form of fish, fish meal, fish oil. Very soon we're going to run out of fish in our oceans, and we're going to run out of land to raise livestock. So we're going to be turning to this, a more closed-loop system of aquaculture called aquaponics, a combination of aquaculture and hydroponics that grows both fish and plants. Businesses are already snatching up abandoned industrial warehouses in many urban settings. This happens to be one that I visited in Chicago, raising fish in tanks, growing vegetables on top with wastewater, and then cycling it back to the fish. But they all use massive amounts of electricity, and they all use massive amounts of feed inputs. And regardless of where the fish on your plate comes from, now or in the future, is the process of catching and slaughtering that fish, is that process humane? Well, if it isn't, then why do we do it? Many of you probably know what nociceptors are, especially polymodal nociceptors. They're sensory receptors associated with feeling pain. Most mammals have numerous polymodal nociceptors in and around their face, their head, their neck. All of you do. So do fish. In reality, there's no such thing as sustainable commercial fishing today. With continued warming, acidification, and deoxygenation, our oceans that we once felt were so robust will very soon be unable to support what few life forms remain in and around them. So the timelines that we're faced with for our oceans look like this. This is not science fiction. It's not something that I made up just on the way down here. It's reality. And quite sadly, this has all happened on our watch. You're looking at what we created and then passing on to future generations. While palm oil has front-page status, tropical rainforest loss due to livestock has occurred at a 4 times greater rate than that due to palm oil. In the last 25 years, 10 times more rainforest has been lost due to raising livestock than what's been lost due to palm oil. So be concerned about palm oil, but be 10 times more concerned about livestock and animal agriculture. An area of tropical rainforest the size of a football field is destroyed every second. That's tragic. This is what a few thousand to a million-year-old rainforest now looks like, because the world's food priorities are with eating livestock, not with being stewards of other living things, as we should be. This is the sad result. The burning and bulldozing of rainforests. Soon pasture, cattle, and grass will follow this in. Usually erosion, desertification, and localized climate change as well. If you choose to eat livestock here in the US or anywhere else, you're supporting this destruction by fueling the global demand for meat. Between 70 and 80% of all rainforest loss in the Amazon is due to raising cattle, with another 10% loss due to growing crops to feed them and other livestock. And remember again, these livestock are grazing. It's not a matter of factory farming. By the year 2050, most rainforests will be gone, and the few patches that remain will have already been way past their tipping point. This, of course, means that all the millions of species that originally lived in these rainforests will be gone: the shaman, the indigenous people. The once abundant water systems will be destroyed, and of course, their oxygenation and climate regulatory mechanisms will be lost for the next few millions of years, which is how long it took these rainforests to develop, and we've wiped them out in less than 50 years. Well, many predict that we have only 60 years left before we run out of topsoil, because 1/2 of all Earth's topsoil has already been lost just in the past 100 years. Most of the world's agricultural land suffers from severe erosion. We need topsoil to grow food. At the beginning of this erosion equation is deforestation, and the majority of deforestation and erosion combination can be blamed on animal agriculture. In fact, less than 1% of all crops grown worldwide are with organic methods for direct human consumption. Less than 1%. Well, what's that you say? I mean, somebody in the back, I'm sure, is thinking, oh, well, let's just grow more topsoil, you know, like in large test tubes, similar to how we're going to grow more meat in the future, right? or maybe we could make more topsoil with a new app on your smartphone. Yeah, we have technology to do that, right? Don't we, Siri? Yes, there is a way to make more topsoil. It's called nature. And it requires 500 years to grow 1 inch of topsoil. This is how much land is being used to raise livestock, 45% of the entire land mass on Earth. So how accurate is this ridiculous figure? Well, it was documented by the International Livestock Research Institute. So most likely, this 45% figure was underestimated. In fact, if we factor in the 230 million acres of public lands used for grazing, livestock account for 97% of all land used for agriculture in our country. The reason animal agriculture creates so many sustainability problems is quite simple. It's terribly inefficient, and it wastes resources, energy, and lives. You can produce 15 times more protein from plants as you can from animals on any given area of land. You can produce anywhere from 2,500 to 60,000 pounds of plant foods on 1 acre of land versus 50 to 480 pounds of meat or animal products on that same 1 acre. In the US, raising animals for us to eat creates more pollution of our waterways than all other industries combined. And look at this sad statistic. Livestock produce 100 times more waste than the entire human population in our country. 7 million pounds per minute. To be sure, world hunger has many layers of complexity. One of the larger reasons is tied to poverty, but another significant factor is the looming shadow of our current demand to eat livestock and fish, which is indirectly tied to poverty. In fact, eating these animals ultimately affects food prices, food availability, and policymaking, which then suppresses progress in developing countries. Even with increased climate change, we are producing enough grain globally to feed 2 times as many people as there are on Earth. Last year, there was considered a record harvest grain in the world with over 3 billion tons produced, but nearly half of that was given to animals in the meat and dairy industries. Each year, 77% of all coarse grain produced in the world for food is consumed by livestock. We can't blame climate change, droughts, or flooding for the world's food security issues. Clearly, the difficulty is not how or if we can produce enough food to feed the hungry or the growing global population, but rather where all the food we produce globally is going. Solving world hunger isn't as simple, I think, or easy as giving them the grain that would normally go to livestock. The solution, particularly in developing countries, requires a multi-dimensional approach to sustainability, established on many levels simultaneously, with organic plant-based food systems at the nucleus. The model for success at reducing hunger in developing countries, I believe, should look like this: no livestock. And by the way, wherever geographically you can grow plants for cattle or other livestock to eat, you can certainly grow plants for direct human consumption. We're losing other species on Earth at an unprecedented rate. Plants, animals, insects, all gone. The current view of most scientists is more related to the rate of extinction rather than the exact number. They just can't keep up, that we're losing anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times the background rate, that which we've seen for the previous several thousands of years, which used to be 2 to 4 species going extinct per year. Regardless of the metric, it's now a massive and quite embarrassing amount. So why all the extinctions, and what are we doing about it? Nearly all concerned researchers agree that the primary cause of rapid biodiversity loss we're witnessing on our planet today is by pastured and grazing livestock on land, loss of habitat, and by unsustainable fishing practices in our oceans. There are only 100 Mediterranean monk seals left. What we're doing to other forms of life on Earth is unparalleled in the history of our planet, where one species is causing the mass extinction of nearly all other species. It reminds me of this somewhat well-known and very appropriate comment that if all insects on Earth disappeared, within 50 years, all life on Earth would end. However, if all human beings disappeared from Earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. I mentioned earlier that buying local has little to do with sustainability other than from an economic standpoint. It's a solid idea to help nearby farmers, and that's important. But in fact, transportation is only responsible for 4%. Just 4% of all the fossil fuels used and all the greenhouse gases emitted in the entire food production process. So it's much more important to view this by using a complete life cycle analysis. 2014 was designated the year of the family farmer, which is a good thing. But we must remember that it is the type of food that matters most, not the size of the farm or the miles traveled. So by all means, support your local farmer markets, and cooperatives, but it has to be plant-based in order to make sense. Knowing and doing. These are some of the solutions of knowing. We need to increase our educational base regarding this food choice sustainability connection and not let previous bias get in the way. And these are some of the solutions to our sustainability crisis by doing. Well, I have another solution dealing with accountability, which would get us on track much quicker, and it's what I call the eco and health risk tax. It's something we've never done before, because the true cost to our environment and to our own health has always been externalized. It's never been directly paid for, with our heads always turned in the other direction. We need to impose this tax, or incentivize, how you want to word it, on those producers and consumers who generate the most inefficient, resource-depleting food items. Globally, we spend $500 billion each year subsidizing the meat, dairy, and fishing industries. This money could be spent transitioning these farms to fully plant-based systems. This is one of the questions of our future. It's a topic that's gaining momentum, which I find a natural path for most people wanting so badly to hang on to the false sense of needing versus simply wanting to eat animal products. It's a path of least resistance. So let's look at a couple different ways to answer this question, and there you have it. That's one way to answer it, certainly. I mean, he thinks so, and so do many others. My thought, though, is that we need to be fully aware of the consequences of our food choices, not partially aware. And we need to understand what we're doing to all areas of global depletion, and we need to know the magnitude and the urgency of the problem. You know what? This is not a go meatless on Monday type of problem. So let's take a look at another way to answer this question, at how sustainable raising grass-fed livestock really is. To do this, I think it's always important to go to the very essence of the whole problem. If we gave everybody in this room 1 acre of land to grow any food you choose, what would you grow? What should you grow? Well, at all my other college and university lectures, the students know what they want to grow. They keep asking me if they can grow this every year, and I don't know what it is, of course, but and we need some variety. On this 1 acre, you could try to raise 1 grass-fed cow, thinking it's fully sustainable, just like that New York Times multiple-time best-selling author is telling everyone. But in most areas of the world, 1 acre is not nearly enough. You're going to need 5, 10, even 20 acres, I found, for that 1 cow. So if you used your 1 acre for grass-fed livestock, you'd end up with 50 to 100, maybe 400 pounds of a type of food that's then implicated in numerous disease states after you eat it. And along the way, you've produced 4 to 5 tons of methane and carbon dioxide, and you've used 1 to 2 million gallons of water for that 1 cow. Or instead, if you use your acre of land to grow something like kale, quinoa, potatoes, beans, you got to put potatoes in there for Dr. McDougall, or vegetable fruit combinations, you've produced 20 to 50, 60,000 pounds of food that's infinitely healthier for you to eat and for our planet to grow. It's literally astounding what you could produce on that 1 acre over the period of time it'd take to raise your 1 grass-fed cow. It's quite an amazing difference, isn't it? Now, imagine extrapolating that model out, or variations thereof, in terms of global use of our resources, and now answer that very same question about how sustainable raising grass-fed livestock really is. That's what I'm asking here before I was hastily removed from the farm. And for those who still think that eating any animal is sustainable, then it's time to understand this concept, relative or optimal relative sustainability. That'll work. How sustainable is it to raise and eat any animal product in a relative sense as compared to plant-based foods? How can we best use our resources? What foods will have the very least effect on climate change? Which foods best promote our own human health, and which are the most compassionate? This is the way we need to start viewing things, in a relative sense, as we try to achieve optimal sustainability. Now, about the Go Meatless on Monday campaign. assuming you eat meat on the other days of the week, if you do this. I mean, if you go meatless on Mondays, you're going to be contributing to climate change, pollution, global depletion of our planet's resources, and your own health on only 6 days of the week instead of 7. You're going to be creating a false justification for your actions on those other 6 days of the week. In other words, let's not rest on the laurels of what you're doing right only 1/7 of the time. What does eating less meat really mean? Just in the 1 hour I'm speaking here today, say from 2 to 3 o'clock, over 8 million animals were slaughtered for us to eat in that 1 hour. 114,000 tons of grain were fed the livestock we're raising. But during that same 1 hour, 354 children in the world have died from starvation. 6,000 acres of tropical rainforest were destroyed and replaced by cattle or crops to feed them. And over 4 million tons of greenhouse gases have been dumped into our atmosphere by livestock. Therefore, I'm advocating a much different approach than what the United Nations and others suggest when they state that we should eat less meat. Because with that approach of eating less meat, well, only 7 million animals will be slaughtered in the next hour, and only 113,000 tons of grain will be wasted, leaving only 353 children in the world that'll starve to death in that 1 hour. Isn't that what less means? So unlike Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan and all other eat less meat advocates and food gurus, I think those numbers should be 0. I sure do. And it's easily attainable. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's easily attainable. There's no magic involved. Nothing has to be invented. No new technologies have to be employed. It's simply with what we choose to eat. And now we're going to take a look at the food service section of the policy of sustainability for the entire University of California system. Why? Because it's a perfect example of how the efforts of well-intentioned individuals and institutions can be so very far out of alignment with reality because of the definitions they're using. So you tell me, is this policy sustainable? What about the items I just highlighted in orange? Are those sustainable? How about their primary objective of 20% by the year 2020? I mean, who thought of that? Professor 20? I mean, is that sustainable? Where does this policy fit in terms of optimal sustainability? And it's not much better with campuses on the east side of the country, is it? I took this right off the Dining Services website at Harvard's School of Public Health. And here at Emory, they're doing some impressive things and won a number of sustainability awards. But there's a serious disconnect with definitions and the role of food choice in their sustainability efforts. So even at these prestigious universities, West Coast, East Coast, even here at Emory, they would certainly benefit from understanding and then adopting a more accurate view of sustainability and then translating it to their students, our future leaders, and to do it now. Otherwise, we'll continue floating around in a zone that I call pseudo-sustainability. That's where we are today. Thinking we're sustainable, but never getting to where we need to be. And one more important definition that needs refinement: ethics. The ethical consideration of what we choose to eat. The topic of conscious eating has always been about animal rights, a very noble topic. Animal rights, animal welfare, hasn't it? The life and death of other living beings that we consume, how they're treated. Ethics has always been about this. But I think it's time to view conscious eating or ethics in a much different and a much larger context. Is it ethical, for instance, for any of us to eat food that causes the extinction of other species if we don't need to? Is it ethical for the vast majority of humans to cause or contribute heavily to irreversible climate change, loss of ecosystems, and resource depletion, while 2% of us are living our lives by way of food choice to protect Earth? Is it ethical for any of us to use our planet in a way that exacerbates world hunger and extracts the potential for future generations to survive? Is it even ethical for 319 million Americans to impose their diet-related healthcare costs on the 7 million who choose to eat the right foods? So you see, it's time we rethink ethics. I think it needs to be framed much differently than just with animal rights. In fact, one of the chapters in my most recent book is titled, "Why Should I Pay for what everybody else decides to eat?" It makes little sense to continue doing what our predecessors did in the late 1800s and early 1900s, when we didn't know any better and there were far less mouths to feed and more land and water to do so. Do any of you still use a typewriter or a feather quill pen to write a message with? Huh? Feather quill pens out there? How about the Pony Express or the Stagecoach to send those messages or to travel? And you thought the internet was slow. Well, your great-grandparents did these things. And what about candles or kerosene lamps to read with at night? Anybody using kerosene lamps to read my book with at night? Well, why not? Why don't you use these things? I'll tell you why. Because they're obsolete, that's why. We've outgrown them. They're inefficient. They don't fit. And so it is with all meat, dairy, and fish. The world on a global basis can no longer support the production of these things. Just like the typewriter, just like the Stagecoach. We need to evolve past them, and we need to do it today because the clock is ticking. Almost everything we do, every decision we make every day is based on our culture, what we've learned, what someone else has told us to be acceptable or necessary. After realizing that bloodletting here wasn't so healthy for us after all, we miraculously stopped, even though we've been doing it for more than 3,000 years. There are culturally driven practices we're accepting today, especially with food choices involving all animal products that are much more unhealthy for our planet and for us than bloodletting. And by all counts, we don't have 3,000 years to get it right. Many organizations are quite concerned about how we're going to feed the growing human population, expected to reach 9.6 billion by the year 2050 because demand for food, including meat and dairy, will double what it is today. And looking at the future, we do have some troubling trends. And this is where many of our problems begin, with this organization and with comments and statements like this. The demand to raise, slaughter, and eat animals is hardly believable. Last year, the one-year figures looked like this. One-year figures. With these figures expected to double by the year 2050, where does the phrase eating less meat mean here? Maybe a ton less of pork. And if we really try to make a change in someone's diet, really try to take away something that's unhealthy for them and give them truth about what they're eating, look what happens. Not quite, but at this stage, one would have to ask, what are all the conservation groups doing about this problem? The ones we give our money to. All these groups are concerned about climate change, no problem there, but none of them have made a statement about the profound effect eating animals has on our environment, despite the fact that it does, and despite the fact that we've entrusted these groups to preserve and protect our planet. Where's all of our donated money going? Aside from those conservation groups, there are a few researchers and organizations that are quite aware of the dire predicament that we're in and the very short timelines that we're faced with. Any of these folks will bluntly tell you that our species is in a state of unsustainability and that we can't remain on this course for very much longer. It's not just me. But not one of them is connecting the final dot. They continue telling us that our survival is in peril and that we need to change. But change what? And they make it very clear that we should stop over-consuming and overproducing. But over-consuming and overproducing what? Again, fossil fuels and waste are very easy targets for them to point their fingers at. Why aren't we getting the truth from those with platforms, those who are guiding us? Well, it's because of three reasons. First, they're comfortably unaware. Or some are partially aware, but they simply can't bring themselves around to make the right statement because they themselves consume animals. After all, how can we expect one of our leaders to guide us toward health and restoration of our planet if they can't even do it for themselves? And lastly, many of our leaders are afraid. They're afraid they're going to lose their audience. The United Nations Sustainability Summit was recently held in New York City, where 193 nations formally adopted an agenda for sustainability. They also adopted some global goals to be achieved by the year 2030. It was an impressive event, but of the 17 goals, 10 are directly related to food choice. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that their goals will ever be met if leaders fail to understand the concept of optimal relative sustainability. And why are they waiting until the year 2030? With medicine and healthcare practitioners, we have this issue with patient compliance, don't we? Yeah, or what could be called presumed compliance. A diagnosis is made, a treatment plan proposed, but the patient may not stick with it or even begin the regimen you prescribe. Regarding lifestyle changes, this will happen more times than not. So you prescribe a less drastic approach than what the patient really needs because they don't want to hear it. Cut out dairy? Are you kidding? I'm not going to do that. Hey, listen, Doc, if you tell me one more time that I have to change my diet and lose weight, meaning you think I'm fat, well, then I'm going to walk right out here and find a doctor who won't be so rude. That's what I'm going to do, all right? Yeah. This is a serious problem, a pervasive issue, I think, with all healthcare professions. A problem that I call the DWT LMP syndrome. Yeah, maybe you've heard of it. Yeah, you know, the don't want to lose my patience syndrome. That's what it is. Therefore, you put the bar only as high as you think the patient will go rather than where they need to be, somewhat like this. Regarding food choice and the environment, whether we're talking about healthcare practitioners, family, or friends, all of us need to raise the bar to where it needs to be and then find ways to reach it. Every 5 years, the U.S. dietary guidelines are updated. These guidelines influence many programs in the U.S., including the $16 billion per year school lunch program. For the first time ever, this year, earlier in February, it was recommended by their advisory committee that these new dietary guidelines take into consideration the environment. Well, that set off campaigns like this one in the positive direction, but it also set off a massive backlash from the meat and dairy industries, which is quite expected because the meat and dairy industries believe that scientific evidence regarding the environment and food has no place in the U.S. dietary guidelines. So are these recommendations enough? No, they're not nearly enough, which is why I'm so encouraged to see many grassroots efforts. Some of them are like these, wonderful new films to help matters. I'm not sure if any of you have had a chance to see Cowspiracy yet. Thank you. And of course, this great new film. Yeah, thank you. Of course, that great new film. And you know what? There are going to be 2 other films that are coming out in the next few months about the environment and food. The choices we make together, particularly with things we consume, such as food, dictates supply and therefore directs the use of our resources. It's not the industrial meat producer or the dairy factory farmer that'll take down the last standing rainforest on Earth. And it won't be the large commercial fishing trawler that's responsible for catching that last poor single fish remaining in the sea. It'll be the consumer who's demanding it. Knowing everything I've talked about today, there's certainly ample reason for feeling quite discouraged, isn't there? Anybody feeling discouraged out there? Yeah, me too. I mean, I understand. Regarding loss of our planet's life systems, what we've done to our planet, there's so much bad news in the truth around us that even with increased awareness, it seems we're going to be constantly fighting an uphill battle. But in the midst of potential despair, there can be found great news. There's an easy solution to global depletion. We don't have to destroy our planet or ourselves to eat. In fact, it's the other way around, but we must change, and it is a choice. We need to eliminate, substitute, replace the practice of raising, slaughtering, and consuming animals, and we must do it now. There's great news in all this because the food choices that are optimal for our planet's health happen to be the very same food choices that optimize our own health. So you know what? We could all be heroes. That's right, all of us. We could even be superheroes, swooping down and saving lives and saving our planet with every single thing we eat every single day. Yeah, a superhero. I'm feeling better already. Something quite telling happened at the end of the annual Global Climate Change Conference that we talked about earlier. In her closing remarks, the Executive Secretary of the conference, Christiana Figueres, provided a summary of the conclusions of 200 nations, NGOs, and researchers by stating this about our future, about greenhouse gas emissions, and about climate change. She said this: "The science is unquestionable. Therefore, despite the obvious effects on the industry itself, we must call for the elimination of the use of coal as an energy source. And we must do this immediately." Okay. Notice she didn't say we should use less coal or for us to use only local or humane coal. I'm pretty sure I didn't hear her say that. And I also didn't hear her say we should all go coal-less on Mondays. In fact, she said we should eliminate coal, even though coal carries with it roughly the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions that raising livestock does. And coal has no real direct effect on water scarcity, world hunger, loss of biodiversity, and all other areas of global depletion, but raising and eating animals does. Therefore, the door has been opened, hasn't it? Perhaps inadvertently by Ms. Forgettis and 200 nations in my interpretation. But as far as I'm concerned, the global stage for massive food choice change has been set. If there is an imminent threat to our planet and to us, which there is, well, we should certainly be able to call for its elimination and for it to be done immediately. As a global community, we'd have no difficulty joining arms to avert a looming nuclear war. It'd become our #1 priority without question. But the cause of our demise may never be a nuclear disaster. It may very well be something as simple as food choice and the fact that it was never placed as our #1 priority. So I encourage and challenge everyone to become more aware about your food choices. Seek more accurate definitions. Understand and appreciate the timelines that we're faced with. And then let's all commit to making a difference. But not just with our own health or our own life. No, let's all commit to making a difference in someone else's life. And let's commit to making a difference in the long-term health of our planet. But let's do it now, not later. We might not have a later. And let's think about making a difference every day of the week, not just on Mondays. Be a superhero for those around you, guiding them and saving lives every single day. That, my friends, is what sustainability and positive change to achieve it is really all about. With that in mind, let's all of us here today in this room, let's all of us go out and inspire others to become aware. Thank you so very much. You're a tremendous audience. Thank you. It's certainly a privilege for me to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.